Okay, from our studios this week in Los Angeles and Tampa, this is Green Tagged Theme Park in 30. I'm Philip from Gantom Lighting and Controls, and I'm joined, as always, by my delightful co-host who loves his Spanish espresso hot, Scott Swenson of Scott Swenson Creative Development. On Green Tagged, we look at the top news each week, and we explain why it matters to business professionals in the theme park and themed entertainment spaces. And this week, we're going to pick up, as we usually do nowadays, with the continuation of the latest Six Flags saga. And we're going to try and get to some other stories about earnings for Merlin's and what's going on in Mexico with Xcaret. So, on to Six Flags.
Back to Six Flags. Maybe that's the more accurate description. Meanwhile, back at Six Flags.
Last time that we talked about Six Flags was 2 weeks ago because we had that sojourn into the Halloween world with our coverage of Transworld. But now that we're back, remember last time we talked about how Jana was pressuring Six Flags to sell, but the secondary demand they had was them to replace the board because they didn't think that the head of the chairman of the board was effective, basically. Or, they had all these things. It's not effective, mismanagement.
Yeah, it was that strange story about they support the CEO, but they don't support the board.
Yeah, it was strange. And then we were talking about how it's possible that if the board really is hindering the CEO, then that could be preventing some of the changes. I mean, that's kind of was
absolutely. Yeah. It's there are many stories in the theme park industry about how the board has either directly or indirectly negatively impacted growth and new development. So it's nothing new or surprising to me. I've lived it, and for those of you who know my career, you can easily understand exactly what I'm talking about.
And Six Flags did replace the board pretty quickly. I mean, this was what we talked about it so less than 2 weeks. I mean, this whole thing happened in, a week and a half or whatever. And so they announced this week that the appointment of Richard Haddrill as executive chairman of the Six Flags board of directors effective immediately. With Mr. Haddrill's appointment, Marilyn Spiegel will serve as lead independent director. So that Marilyn was the previous executive director. So now she's going down to lead independent director, but she's still going to be on the board. And in the press release, they talked about how they're trying, basically. So they said over the last several months, Six Flags has taken decisive actions to improve performance, including appointing John Reilly as CEO in December, accelerating the company's portfolio optimization, and improving its capital structure. All of those things are true. They did put the new CEO and they did sell a bunch of parks to improve their debt, but not by much. So Haddrill's appointment continues Six Flags' effort to refresh the composition of its board and reinforce its commitment to ensuring the board has the right mix of skills to oversee the company's successful evolution. And what skills, you might be asking? Well, he came from his previous role was executive vice chairman of the board of Scientific Games, which is now Light & Wonder, a leading provider of gaming and entertainment solutions services. Before that, he served as chief executive officer of Bally Technologies, where he led the company through significant growth and strategic transformation, culminating in its acquisition by Scientific Games, so he kind of just stayed there. So what do you think, Scott?
Well, I mean, I'm just glad that we're seeing Six Flags taking the action on what they're saying they want to do. They all too often we will hear with many organizations, we should do this, or this is what we want you to do, or this is where we should go, and then nothing happens, or they go about it so slowly that they change their mind before they actually implement the first thing they thought they should do. So I don't think in this particular case, because normally I'm usually the measure twice, cut once kind of guy. But in this particular case, I think a rapid action is a wise move. And I think that especially if, as our previous report suggested, that the board is standing in the way of the new CEO. So there's that. And that may have been, there may be something that we don't know yet. That may have been some of the challenges even prior to the merger. I mean, that may have been one of the issues that was challenging either Six Flags or Cedar Fair or both prior to the merger. So it's it seems as though they are, as you say, they're moving very quickly to do what they say they're going to do. And, people are like, well, he doesn't have any theme park experience, but he certainly has entertainment experience. And, and it's entertainment experience that, as we've talked about, is becoming more and more part of the theme park world, and that is the active engagement side. So it seems like it's not an obvious move, but it seems like a decent move when you actually kind of break it down. Because again, John Reilly knows how to run parks. That's his background.
Yep.
So to have a board chair that knows how to entertain people interactively, or has worked for companies that know how to entertain people interactively, seems like a nice little marriage there. Seems like a nice little, assuming they can play nicely together, it seems like it's bringing kind of the best of both worlds into the top of the food chain for Six Flags. What I think is going to be interesting now is to see what happens with the rest of the board. Oh, before we get lost though, I do think that keeping Marilyn Spiegel is an interesting move. The reason I say it's an interesting move is, and I don't think it's necessarily bad. I'm gonna play cup half full here. I think having someone still actively and strongly on the board who knows what went wrong, who knows the path, can answer some questions moving forward to finding a solution. I think all too often, companies, not just on the board level, but on any level, will, when things are going wrong, they get rid of all the people who were there when things went wrong. A whole new team comes in, they try all kinds of new stuff without knowing why things went wrong to begin with. So I think keeping her on could conceivably be a smart move, and one that is not based on ego, but is based on trying to get the most out of this board and trying to make the company turn around, because she has knowledge that nobody outside the realm of the board would have. And so I think keeping her on and keeping her in a position that is not, the janitor, is a very wise move, assuming that everyone can put their egos aside and they can work together to do their jobs as a board and a C-suite gathering to make the parks and the brand successful again. So
yep.
She has knowledge that could be very useful to them in the future.
Right. I think now it's all just a little bit on John. So this is the interesting thing I took from it, which is it's almost like, I don't know how to say it, but it feels a little bit like they're putting a lot of what do you want, like faith or trust or expectation, whatever the word you want to say is, on John Reilly here, because now with this weird political machinations, they have cover to say, well, we even replaced the executive chairman of the board, so you should have no excuse for what you're not going to do. And that may or may not be true, because we're still operating off of no information. So we don't really know that the board was a problem. But if you assume that the board was a problem and now they've kind of lost that cover, but at the same time, like you said, Marilyn is still there. And so the half full lens is, like you said, she has the institutional knowledge that is critical to avoid future failure. The other end of it is it's a Game of Thrones situation, right? And she's still there pulling strings and causing mischief. And we just don't know either way. But the only thing I can see from this is now, it's like Jana, they've given Jana everything they want. So what is their excuse now? Which is, you've said you like John Reilly, and we put John Reilly there, and then you said you weren't happy with the board, so we replaced the board. So
they replaced the chairman.
They replaced the chairman, yeah.
They did not replace the board. So I think, again, half full is, okay, we're listening to you as our investors, and we're making the changes that you want. Yeah. The half empty is, we still have board members from the old board who may still be following Marilyn's lead, who may not be happy with John Reilly, because again, either through fault of his or through no fault of his, they have been pitted against one another because they like one, they don't like the other. And also, we have to keep in mind that Jana is only 9% of the only owns 9% of the company. So I think it is important to me, this looks like a moderated but intelligent series of actions.
Yep.
That's the best way I can describe it. Because all too often, in so many odd and often disjointed situations, people will go, nobody likes us, great, we're getting rid of it. And everything goes, and you're left with left with the same problem on the different side of the spectrum. So to make these kinds of moderate changes, and I realize getting rid of a board of the director of the board is not necessarily a moderate change. It is a pretty radical change, but they're not swiping out the entire board, and they're not clearing out the previous, board chair. So I think it sounds like they are making every effort. My only concern is I hope, and this kind of echoes what you were saying, I hope that they're not setting up John Reilly to fail, because they can say, we've done everything you asked for. All right, John. But at the same time, it also kind of gives John the freedom to enact all those things that he discovered when he was in the parks. And I think there was something like 300 different projects that were brought to his attention, or that he's looking at, at least further investigation of these things. So,
well,
we'll see. Fingers crossed for our friends at Six Flags.
That's right. That all we can do now is watch and wait.
And we will.
So next, we're going to move over to Merlin Entertainments. I don't know. So this is news that, again, is not surprising. And I guess I don't even know why it's not surprising, but maybe I have some preconceptions about the Merlin brand. But anyway, Merlin they announced their latest earnings, and basically they're in their annual report. They said that their attendance and revenue were down. They saw a 6.2% drop in attendance at North America. However, overall, they reported total visitor numbers falling 2.3 million in 2025 compared to 2024, with revenue dropping 2.8%. So just down all over the board. And what they said in their annual report is competitive intensity remained elevated throughout the year, driven by increased promotional activity, widespread discounting across the sector, and the launch of new attractions by competitors, including the entry of a new resort into the Florida market. Okay.
An epic resort, one might say.
Yeah, but except that helped everybody else. So anyway, they went on to say, looking ahead, we are seeing positive momentum in Q1 2026 with an exciting pipeline of new rides and experiences opening as the main season gets underway. And that part is true because, of course, the Galactic Coaster, which they previewed at IAAPA, is going to the two resorts here in California and Florida. But that's just one small segment, of the Merlin brand, the whole chain. Yeah,
because Merlin, let's for those of you who aren't familiar with Merlin, Merlin is not an American company. It is. It's based in the UK, if I'm not mistaken, and so they have fingers in many countries. And as their report showed, some of the other countries actually haven't had that bad a year.
Yeah. So what's interesting is pulling, like Scott referenced. So I think for stories like this, I like to look also in what the UK is doing to cover it, because it's not an American brand. And so on the American side, we're focused on the Legoland part of it, but they also have Madame Tussauds. They have a lot of the Sea Life stuff. They have a lot of other brands that they're involved in. And there was a report that came out looking at just the Madame Tussauds thing. And it was interesting because it showed that basically Madame Tussauds is varying according to sector. And I'll quote here from the report. It says, North America was the weakest market, with underlying sales falling 8%. However, Europe revenues rose modestly by 1%, although the UK lagged behind with sales down 3.5% and visitor numbers dropping 6%. Merlin attributed this to weaker demand in London, where fewer international tourists and a shift towards free attractions have weighed on audiences. By contrast, Asia Pacific delivered strong growth, with visitor numbers rising 5.3% and revenues increasing 4.5%. The region also saw a sharp 120% increase in underlying operating profits, supported by strong performance at Legoland resorts in Japan and Shanghai. In response to the downturn, Merlin is investing in new concepts to revitalize Madame Tussauds and attract a broader audience. Among the initiatives planned in 2026 is an immersive Jumanji-themed experience set to launch in major locations in New York, Hollywood, Las Vegas, and Sydney. So again, it's a more nuanced picture where you kind of look at it's like that. It's this weird thing where it's like, is this a market area because they operate in so many different countries? The different countries have different things, or is it a market age thing? I mean, I was looking at this and thinking, well, another through line here is that North America is the most developed, and then you have the European is right under that, and then you have Asia as a more emerging market. Still, I mean, not emerging technically, but still growing, I guess, whatever you want to put on it. But it's not as developed as the US.
It's a growth market. There's no question.
Yeah. So you could map it in that way as well. But this, again, then they said, of course, in Asia, it's mainly driven by the Legoland, but at the Japan and Shanghai, right, where the competition makeup is different, right? The Legoland, I guess I'm saying, I don't know if this is fair, but part of me is thinking, I guess in the US, we have a lot of destinations that I think were perceived as better quality than what Merlin is producing. But if you look at the competitive mix of like Shanghai, for example, it's the Legoland Shanghai is an excellent thing. We went there. I went there to tour it when it opened, and I remember saying on the show how Legoland Shanghai is extraordinary. I mean, it's a fantastic park. It's so well done. It's so well built, and it's really, really. I mean, it's very competitive is my point, right? And so maybe part of this problem is that they're just, a lot of their properties are just not competitive really in the markets they're in.
But let me ask you, is the Legoland Shanghai experience, would you say they are the top of the theme park food chain? Where do they fall as far as competition goes?
In the Shanghai region, they're probably right under Disney.
Okay, so they're number 2.
But then, of course, you have Beijing, which has Universal, but that's, again, it's like, that's pretty far, from Shanghai, at least. And so, but I would say that in terms of the family kind of focus and the theming and, the amount of rides and all that kind of stuff, it's under. It's, I don't know where you would put it, I guess, for a American comparison. Maybe like Universal Kids might be a good like comparison. Okay. Because it is strong theming, right? The coasters are themed, the food is themed, the like nothing falls apart, in terms of like you're looking over here and it doesn't make any sense.
You got to use the glue.
Well, the Legos fall apart, but not the theming, the narrative structure is pretty coherent.
Well, it's funny because when I looked at it, and this is probably my own naivete, but when I looked at it, when they said, in basically the Asia markets, these are markets that are less reliant on international tourism.
Yep, that's true.
Obviously, the North American markets are very much reliant on international tourism, and we all know that is down, and we may discover that will continue to go down because of pricing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Probably the second in line is the European markets.
Yep.
So it seems as though the pendulum has swung back, and this is anecdotal. This is not based on anything other than my observations. But it seems as though, or the question that I wanted to put forth is, could it possibly be that these markets don't have to rely on international tourism as much because of the population of the areas, number one, and number two, the fact that they've never, well, not never, but they are less reliant on international dollars coming in to make these parks successful.
That's I
don't know what you think
about, and that's very interesting because even if you look at their investments in Florida and California, I think that they are targeting locals, for the Legoland Galactic Coaster. Like it's really so that's interesting too. You could look at it from any of these lenses. Is it the region, or is it, like you said, the experiences on an individual level that are doing better are ones that are more local focused, or something that locals would want to do? I guess you could put it that way. Versus like, when was it? I mean, I don't think locals never go to the, Madame Tussauds stuff, right? Or they never go. A lot of the
if they go, they're taking relatives. That's
right.
They're taking people who are visiting from a tourist standpoint. The other thing you have to take into consideration, at least in the Florida market, is keep in mind Legoland is nowhere near Orlando.
Yep.
It's near, but it's an hour away.
Yep.
Basically. So it's not something that you're going to hop on a bus on International Drive and have it drop you off at Legoland.
Yeah, so I think your point to that, also back to what they said about the competition, because they weren't close enough to Epic, they probably didn't get that tourist bump, because people
Correct.
aren't going to take an hour or get an Uber or find a bus or taxi or whatever to go an hour out when they're there for Epic. They're going to stay within the little bubble, which boosted Disney because it's close enough to Disney, but it probably didn't
And
boost Lego.
SeaWorld and Universal and
Yep.
every other park in Orlando.
Yep.
My guess is Point Orlando is having a good year. I don't know that, but I would. And there is a Tussauds there, so I'm curious whether that individual one will be doing any better. But and a Sea Life. There's a Sea Life there as well.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I think that was kind of my point in saying that it's a little bit outside of the realm, because it's yes, it's drawing people to the Orlando specific market. But the Legoland in Florida is quite a ways from Orlando. It's quite a ways from Tampa. It's out in the old Cypress Gardens area. It's kind of to be honest, kind of in the middle of nowhere. Sorry, people who live there, but it's let me put it this way: it's not the hub of Orlando. And it's not something that people would say, "Oh, we got to go to Epic because it just opened in Orlando, and let's take an afternoon and go over to Legoland." Not going to happen.
Yeah.
Or if it does, it's very rare. And they're probably, if it does happen, they're on their way to the beach in Tampa, so they'll stop there on their way over.
Well, anyway, I think it's interesting that they're talking about the immersive type experiences and investment. And of course, we've already seen it, and so I think those are good markers. But I think this could potentially be another situation where you have some assets that are just might need to be recycled in some way, because you're gonna get back into that trap, right? Where it's like they have so many assets spread throughout the world, and they can't invest in all of them at the same time. And so how do they rebalance these? It's similar to the Six Flags thing, sort of, where I'm sure that there's properties that are not great that they might be able to recycle or do something with in order to keep the investment to stay competitive in these other places. Because you're just not. I think that a lot of these markets you just can't. You have to reinvest to stay competitive. But
well, and this has been a challenge for as long as there have been theme parks, and it's finding that balance between local and tourism base. So we'll see. It appears, again, I say this, it appears anecdotally that those that are less reliant, at least in this specific lens, those that are less reliant on tourism, especially international tourism, are doing better than those that are relying on people coming in from other places.
Yep.
Don't know.
So let's move over to Xcaret in Mexico. So this is an interesting one, and just because anyway, I'll read here from an excerpt from the Yucatan magazine. Here, I'll just read some excerpts. So the Supreme Court has ordered the Xcaret group to stop using Maya cultural elements in its parks, hotels, and advertising. And for those that are not familiar, which I was not until recently, but the Xcaret is a kind of, I guess you describe it as a theme park compound type of thing, where there's 3 different theme parks. There's one focused on Maya culture. There's also one focused on wellness, and I think there's one focused on sports and that. So they have different focuses, all the 3 of them. But then around them, there's also resorts that are connected to each one, and it's sort of like a compound. But it's the big selling point here is that it's all inclusive. So you book there, and you are paying a much higher room rate, but that's because your transportation is included, your meals are included, your entry into the theme parks are all included. Like, everything is included. So it's this
similar to Port Aventura, just outside of Barcelona.
That's right. Yeah. And so and it's received a lot of recognition for the quality of what they do and whatnot. And of course, one of their main parks is all centered around this Mayan cultural elements, but the Supreme Court just ordered that they need to stop using them. And so that could be a very large problem. And this has been ongoing for a while, since 2022. And what had happened was they had gotten a lower court to stay the order while it was going through court, so they could keep the Mayan culture stuff. But the Supreme Court just revoked that. So they, even while this is finishing, going through everything, they have to stop using the references immediately. So let's see. It says the council here, the Mayan Community Council, the council in the area that represents the Mayan culture, accused the company of cultural appropriation by incorporating sacred traditional elements into its theme parks and promotional materials without community consent. Among the disputed symbols are one of the celebrations, the Maya ball game, the sacred Maya voyage, and the dance of the owls. And according here from the article, it says that the main justice based the court's decision on a September 2024 constitutional reform that recognizes the autonomy of indigenous peoples to preserve and protect their cultural heritage, both material and intangible. It also establishes that indigenous communities hold collective intellectual property rights in their heritage, meaning Maya culture is not in the public domain and cannot be freely exploited. And of course, typically, the Mexican Tourist Council sent out a statement being like, this is going to cause untold damage to tourism and rah. But ultimately, I don't know. Ultimately, it's like, look, they've ruled that that Maya culture is an IP, and specifically the stuff they are using, which are like performance. It's like they're using like a ball game and a sacred voyage and a dance of the owls. Like these are not like, anyway, basically I think the court's position is like this is IP. You are using this IP and you're profiting it off of to the point where you're making an entire theme park centered around it, and it's part of your activities. And you do not have rights to use this IP. So, period. And I don't know. I think the cultural, the tourism thing. I'm like, it's like I guess they had to say that kind of statement, but I feel like it's really lacking. Like what they need to do is be like, here's a framework that we can suggest to move forward, some sort of licensing terms that we would like to come to so that other people can get this culture and that we can all collectively make this a great tourist destination to have more people learn about it. Like that's what they should have said. But instead they just were like, this is terrible. Anyway, okay, I'm done. Scott, what do you think?
Well, I think the impact of this can be short-term terrible because... Yeah. And there is not a single cruise port in Mexico that doesn't have some representation of the Mayan culture, either as a photo op, as a performance. It's just over and over and over again, and I'm not sure. I mean, I'm obviously not an expert in Mexican law, but it's, to me, that's sort of like saying, well, you can't celebrate St. Patrick's Day because that is something that is owned by the Irish and the Catholic Church, and in order to do it, you have to pay royalties to them. It seems suspicious to me based on American law, but I don't understand Mexican law. That said, I think cultural appropriation is a challenge. I'm just not sure that cultural appropriation is something that can be considered an IP. The idea here is, if I'm wearing a shirt that says "Proud to be Polish" with a Polish flag on it, does someone in Poland need to make money off of that? That's what this sounds like to me. Because what's happening is
incorrect. I think that's entirely incorrect.
Well, then explain it to me better, because like you just said, they could have come up with an idea where they would have paid them for the IP. That's what an IP is. You pay for it in order to use it. So if this is an IP, explain it better to me so I understand.
Okay, so I'm going to borrow a little bit from my neighbor who actually does something similar, where he goes to the Philippines and where he studies their cultural dances there and whatever. So basically, and in this case, he gets permission. He does all the permissions and everything correctly to be able to bring it back here and perform it.
Permission from who? Permission from who?
From the cultural council there, the Philippine council.
In the Philippines. Okay.
So basically, this is how I see this. So their Mayan community, they're reading through the articles. They have multiple councils, but they do have an official council that represents the Mayan cultural heritage, where they are the ones responsible for maintaining the IP. So they're like, this dance is a Mayan cultural dance, and this is why. And here's the exact movements, and here's the exact way it's performed, and here's what is allowed, and everything. So they have like an IP book about this dance. And what they're saying is, you are using this dance in your theme park and you are profiting off of it because you are using it in your marketing and you are advertising it and you are not paying for a licensing fee for that or have any agreement for us.
Paying.
Which they do have rules around using
paying.
it.
Yes, paying. Exactly that. So that really supports what I was just saying. They need money. They want money. Because if the cultural organization's true goal is to make certain that the Mayan culture continues to be seen by more and more people, by removing it from Xcaret and then in turn every single theme park, every single cruise port in Mexico, their culture will be less visible. And
that's not their goal. I mean, it's an IP. That's what the Supreme Court is saying. It's an IP. And I think everyone agrees with that.
So that's what I'm saying. If they want money.
Right.
They want money. That's exactly what I'm saying. So we're saying exactly the same thing.
The Cultural Council even released a statement and was like, we're willing to talk about this. We're willing to work with you to be able to make sure this is represented properly.
I just want to make sure that we're not framing this completely as cultural appropriation.
No.
Because quite honestly, it's not. This is somebody who has somehow assigned themselves to be the keeper of the Mayan culture for thousands upon thousands of years and claiming it as an IP.
I think it's more, sure. I mean, I guess if that helps with the framing, but...
and now they want money for it.
I guess it's like, it's not just the money, but they also want to make sure that it's represented properly. And that's similar to what my neighbor with the Philippines, they don't charge him, but they do make sure that the way he's doing it is appropriate. And that's why they require him to go and learn there and to prove that he is representing it properly. And then to document the shows so that there's like a proper documentation of it.
Agree 100%.
I think in this case, we don't know how much they're asking for. So it could be like $10, and in which case it would be ridiculous that Xcaret is not doing it. So I think that's more where we're lacking knowledge is how much are they really asking for? What are they really doing? Or what is the degree of damage, which we don't know. But I think it's like unfair to say it's just about money. I think it's like that they've developed like this is how this dance is done and this is how it needs to be followed, just like any IP. And you're like not working with us to make sure that you're doing this properly. And we don't know how much they're going to charge. So maybe
here's the thing. If it was $10, it would not have gone to the Supreme Court.
Well,
here's the thing. I am opposed to cultural appropriation. And in fact, anytime I do anything, I'll give you a perfect example. Anytime I've done anything that is Day of the Dead, I go to the local Mexican consulate to get their blessing, to make certain that we are representing it appropriately. But they're not asking for money. They're not asking for money to be the gatekeepers of their culture. And that's where I think this is a slippery slope, and I think there is something a little bit suspicious about it. We'll see how it pans out. If they go back to Xcaret and say, as long as we have final say on what the end product looks like, then we'll be fine with it. But I doubt that it would go to the Supreme Court if that was indeed the intent. We'll see. We'll keep watching it. Unfortunately, we won't keep watching it this week because we're way over time. So that's the end. Yes, that's the end of Green Tag Theme Park in 30. On behalf of Philip Hernandez with Gantom Lighting and Control and myself, Scott Swenson with Scott Swenson Creative Development. Can't remember the name of my own company.
You mean Spinach Espresso. You're with Spinach Espresso.
Yes, Spinach Espresso. We will see you next week. Bye.